I'm wondering why it is that as something that is so powerful, so effective, has had, thousands of years of efficacy, why it's not more popular in the Western world.
Mainly because India really was, until British colonization, it was pretty isolated from the rest of the world, again, because of the mountains. And also just the social system in India is like this knowledge was reserved for the highest caste system, the Brahmins, the people at the very tip top, the 0.0001% of people who were allowed to be scholars and healers and were like the priestly caste essentially. So it was very, even within India, I mean, there's common knowledge about it, home remedies and things like that. But it was, Sanskrit is a very elite language. It's extremely difficult to understand. It's extremely difficult to study. Even having access to it is very rare globally. Even in main universities, I think it's only offered in 3 or 4 universities in the US as like Sanskrit classes. I know because I majored in it and there's like, I think 3 or 4. Even within India, it was kind of part of the elite. But then also, because India was more protected, it just didn't have a way to get out of there necessarily until British colonization. And from there, it did start to spread. And it definitely spread outside of India in terms of what is called the Indian diaspora, where people did eventually migrate out of India through the Himalayas down into places like Indonesia, et cetera, Malaysia, like that whole kind of path of Southeast Asia. There are branches of Ayurvedic medicine that's more mixed with traditional sort of indigenous medicine in those areas as well. But it wasn't really until the late 1800s to early 1900s that yogis and other Ayurvedic practitioners started leaving India and coming to the States. It really wasn't until the 1960s that became more prevalent. And that's when Ayurveda started to come into more American public consciousness. And obviously it's exploded more recently because of the internet. Now things are much more accessible. It's a lot easier, obviously, to get to India because you can fly in. You don't have to deal with the mountains and all of the or trains, things like that. So it has, I think public awareness has spread quite a bit. Also, as yoga took off in the States, that's how most people, myself included, found Ayurveda was through yoga. Like yoga teacher trainings will generally do an intro to Ayurvedic medicine. So I think that's really when it kind of started to become somewhat more popular, but really it's mainly just a cultural thing that it was very insulated to India for a long time because there was no way for that message to get disseminated until relatively recently in history.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that all makes sense. I just wonder if there's also an element of complexity that makes it not as accessible for people.
Yes, and the language itself
Right.
is, because you essentially do have to learn an entirely new language. When I was in my master's program, I coasted through the Sanskrit because I majored in Sanskrit in undergrad. So for me, it was like, wow, this is way easier than translating these ancient texts. Like, I got this, but everybody else really struggled. The pronunciation is difficult. It's in a different alphabet. You have to learn a different alphabet. You really do have to learn an entirely different language. So there are ways to translate it into like layman's terms or common language. But sometimes like you can't really without a long explanation, or it can be very daunting if you don't know the language, or if you're not Indian, or if you don't have that cultural background. It can seem very overwhelming, again, because it is so detailed. Like the minutia is extreme, and so it's so easy to get caught up in the details instead of zooming out and seeing the big picture, which is, I think, where Ayurveda's potency really lies, and is in its big picture, zoomed out application of everything.
Yeah, which I think is one of the reasons why personally I'm just grateful for Ayurvedic practitioners, because they make it accessible to someone like me who would never study Sanskrit. Just not going to happen for me.
Right.
And why, if you are an Ayurvedic practitioner and you are watching this, reach out to us with your information, because we're going to put a section on our website of Ayurvedic practitioners for people who are looking for that.